And Jennifer is the CEO of Iteros, a really innovative company, and they and EnerBlue together have built the microgrid for us. So Jennifer, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to grab the clicker and wander around a little bit. Well, it's great to be here in front of an audience that is full of problem solvers, especially in an area as important as our energy infrastructure. I was on a long plane flight recently with my husband, and we were seated next to three sweet little girls and their daddy, and they were having an impromptu tea party, which prompted my husband to ask me, what is with little girls and tea parties? To which I responded, I don't really know. My dad was really science-minded, and he was always trying to bring out the problem solver in me. And so we spent our Saturday nights typing in computer programs into my Texas Instruments TI-99 computer. Well, it definitely worked. As a kid, all the way into adulthood, I loved logic puzzles, I loved games, and eventually I went to college, majored in computer science, and became a software developer. So there's a lot of things that I love about software development. One thing that I love is that every day you get a win by solving some piece of a bigger puzzle. The other thing that's great about programming is that you can apply it to almost any domain area. So obviously, mine was energy. I got my start on the transmission grid in the wholesale energy side of the business, and my customers were the balancing authority. The balancing authority is the team that helps to move the power from the power plants to where it's needed, and also helps to determine how much power is needed at any given time. So as a software developer, my job was to build visualizations that helped them understand what was going on and automate it as much as possible. So this was a great introduction to the energy business. The transmission side at that time was pretty straightforward. There was an easily quantifiable number of power plants, usually natural gas or coal, and we controlled the flow of all of that from a central location. Then, in 2003, in August, a massive power outage lost power for 55 million in the United States and Canada. And this was, people lost power for more than a week. This cost the economy $6 billion. So some of these areas, they didn't have backup power, even in critical places like a hospital. And because of that, the outage contributed to 12 lives lost. Well, as you can imagine, at the utility, following that, our focus went to reliability and cybersecurity as well. And this made an impression on my workload, but it also made me think about how were we going to approach this transition to renewable energy. So our company, Iteros, was founded to help that transition to renewable energy while keeping in mind some of these principles of reliability and cybersecurity that were ingrained earlier in my career. So there are a lot of great solutions today. We have solar and wind that are increasingly economical. We have small-scale wind and biomass that's starting to be available at the retail level. Our battery innovators are giving us more power more efficiently at a lower cost. And we have a lot of existing infrastructure. We've got smart meters and transformers and distribution lines. The key is that we have to take all of these new technologies and the existing infrastructure, we got to put it together the right way. And so I go back to the logic puzzles that I loved as a kid, and I started thinking of those sliding tile puzzles. In order to see what the grid of the future is going to look like, we've got to be able to logically shift those tiles in place. We can't just rip it up and start over. So recently, Iteros partnered up with EnerBlue, run by Dan Elliott here on the stage with me. EnerBlue brings a lot of innovation and experience to the table. They've got advanced lithium titanate battery technology, they've got innovative electric school buses. But what specifically brought us together was their grid services division. So they have a commercial product, the AESU, which provides hybridized generation from solar and battery and generators. So this is a great way of getting the optimal power from a single flexible resource. But the other great thing about the AESU is that it can be used as a microgrid, so we always have that source of reliable power. Well, generation is one side of the equation. We also have to be able to balance that generation with our loads, and that is where Iteros plays a role in the partnership. So we brought together EnerBlue and Iteros to be a foundational technology, because we believe that the grid of the future will be structured very differently and operated very differently than the grid that we have today. So it's great, though, that the guiding principles behind this foundation are also some of the key concepts of the Smart Grid Initiative that started in the United States in 2007, partially as a response to that outage that continues on today. So each of the utilities have goals that relate to the smart grid. And each utilities are, they're all a variation of a theme. So today I'm going to use Idaho Power's smart grid objectives for our discussion, and since that's where I'm standing today, and we're going to use that to illustrate the interplay with what the utility is trying to achieve, the foundation that EnerBlue and Ateros bring, and some of the existing initiatives that we have going on today. And as we tie all these objectives together, you'll see how we bring that into the theme of this forum, resilience. So the first of Idaho Power's smart grid objectives is all about customer engagement. Generally, the utility plans big changes to their system out 20 or more years in advance. They build these giant power plants. And as a customer, your main engagement is flipping the light switch and opening your bill every month. Well, the grid of the future is all about customer participation. It's not just about fancy dashboards that show you your energy usage, although that's part of it, but it's also about providing new ways to participate as a customer. So right now, a lot of the utilities are incentivizing their customers to install specific thermostats. And the reason they do that is they can send signals to them on a very hot day, for example, to raise the set point a couple degrees for a few hours. Well, imagine this on a much larger scale. So the smart grid is about incentivizing energy consumers to use energy when it's most plentiful and incentivizing energy producers to produce energy when it can be used the most and store it when it can't. And so there are tangible efforts underway today to build a retail marketplace where people like you and me can buy and sell energy. So this doesn't mean you're looking at your cell phone every 5 minutes trying to decide the best time to run your dishwasher. What it means is that we're using grid principles and market principles to be able to operate the grid more naturally and allow it to scale more naturally without these big 20-year planning horizons. The smart grid is all about rewarding participants in the grid who do their part to achieve the balance. One thing that I don't always hear in terms of customer engagement is really getting into the grassroots community level. So to me, you can't talk about being customer-centered unless you're really working with the community to find out what power sources, when, and how they'll be implemented. Last month, I was at a conference for Hawaii, and we were talking about energy policy and technology and bringing all of these pieces of infrastructure together. But the single biggest discussion point that we kept coming back to was that we have to give a voice to the communities to make decisions that will affect them for generations to come. There I saw a presenter from NREL say, the best solutions are people optimized, not cost optimized. The future of energy lies in the community. The second of Idaho Power's smart grid objectives is that the grid is data rich, and that means we have enough data to operate the grid effectively and efficiently. So advanced metering infrastructure, or smart meters, is a big part of that, but it's also where we start talking about sustainability and renewable energy resources. The grid that we have today wasn't designed as a two-way street. When it was created, everyone who got a bill was just a passive power consumer. But now you or me or anyone in this room can install solar panels on our roof, and at some parts of the day, we may actually be generating more energy than we're using, so we're pushing it back on the grid. And then also the utility is sending those signals down to our devices that change the way we use energy. During the transition, I wouldn't expect that everyone suddenly becomes active grid participants. They're mostly going to stay passive. But we have to be ready for any number of them to go and install solar panels, to install smart devices, and become active grid participants. The grid of the future is an open system that thrives on data and intelligence and active communications, so that with every active grid participant we have a more stable grid. The third of Idaho Power's smart grid objectives is probably the most significant in terms of structural transformation. It's where we move the control from the control center out to the grid edge. And what that means is we're moving it to the houses and the businesses and the factories and the substations and the transformers. And there's a lot of big benefits that we get out of doing that. First off, we have better power quality, so we won't damage motors and other sensitive equipment. But also, it makes it easier for us to integrate customer-owned distributed energy resources, and it makes it easier for us to have targeted opportunities for consumers to participate in the grid. So, and this becomes even more important when you start talking about microgrids, because in a microgrid environment, it can be self-contained, and so balancing becomes essential. The future of energy is control within the community. So bringing these objectives back to the topic of this forum, resiliency, I would say, resilience can mean multiple things. So, it's about operating our critical infrastructure when a big snowstorm or a hurricane comes through, that we can operate things like hospitals and emergency shelters, but also things that you don't normally think about, like cell towers and ATMs. Resilience implies that when we have a cybersecurity attack or a terrorist attack, that we're not taking down large pieces of the grid. And finally, that resilience is about having a local failure like we saw in 2003 not take out a huge portion of our grid. In 2003, after that massive outage, a lot of the utility and the regulated focus went to adding more lines or paths for the power to go, or more energy reserves. But true resilience happens at the community level. It happens when we empower the community to understand where their energy comes from and how it's used. Resiliency comes when we have locally created power, loads that we can control, and data to understand it. Finally, true resilience comes when control is within the community. That same conference last month at Verge Hawaii, I saw a speaker, Dennis McGann. He was just retired as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And he said that before the current administration started, he changed the name of his office from Renewable Energy Program Office to Resilient Energy Program Office. Because no matter how you feel about renewable energy, the Office of Resiliency can't be eliminated. So the thing about the future of energy is it's not a destination and we're done. There will always be legacy assets. There will always be new and evolving standards. There will always be innovations in how we power the grid. The future of energy is about flexibility and scalability, the ability to adapt to get to true resilience. The foundation that EnerBlue and Ateris are building will help the utilities today meet their smart grid goals. But more importantly, it provides the foundation that we need moving forward to adapt all these great new ideas. Everyone in this audience is a problem solver. Some of you have big ideas, and some of you are parents and aunts and uncles and teachers who can inspire the little problem solvers in your life to innovate and create solutions that help us to power our grid, that help us to use energy more efficiently. The future of energy is within those solutions and our ability to adapt them into our community's grid. Thank you.